We sent them to your planet.
Imagine it is 1966, watching from a crowd, a mob of communists of the CCP, of the Red Guard, waging a war against science, against the Big Bang in the Chinese Cultural Revolution led by Mao. Then you see your father paraded out, with your mother as an informant, as your father is brutally beaten to death for believing in science, for standing for the Big Bang, the trauma lingering in your mind. Like, can this be reality? And then Big Villainous answers you, no, this is the three-body problem. Welcome to Overthrow Media. This is Big Villainous. Has been a minute. I know I've been gone for a quick second, but y'all got me back. We're gonna talk about the three-body problem and its underlying anti-communism mixed with some pro-statist, pro-capitalist propaganda. It seems like an innocent story, right? Alien invasion. But you know, you can't have an alien invasion without colonialism. It always seemed to me, alien invasion movies are the colonists projecting their evils upon a fictional alien species. We know if the white man will do it, everybody else will too. I find it striking, though, that not only do they project colonialism onto aliens, but they project it onto the CCP. They start talking about anti-science and anti-American concepts for it, but it doesn't seem like that's really in touch with reality. They aren't the MAGA, for example. Shit, they're not even the Democrats. This is the Red Guard. This isn't really the CCP, but you know, Americans don't know no better. Historical revisionism, a demonization of Mao and communist China. So there was an underlying message within this TV show, and I know this is a book, but I haven't read the book, so I can only speak to the show that I watched on Netflix. And within that TV show, it portrayed communist China or the CCP or the Red Guard as anti-intellectual, as having a war against science, against information, or against knowledge. I find it really interesting that it seems like a projection of what Americans do all the time. Because where did flat earthing first take root? Where did denying the reality of climate change take root? But in America. The idea that Mao or any of the other CCP is anti-intellectual or even anti-academic is kind of ludicrous. At least if you understand even a little bit about what really happened. Even though Mao Zedong never made an appearance, they made a lot of reference to the ramifications of his actions and beliefs, the great proletariat cultural revolution. Not only is it directly said and implied this against science, which directly implies that Mao was anti-academia and anti-science. However, they leave out some interesting factors. Mao Zedong was a student organizer. He was very much involved in academia, and generally I would consider an academic from my standards. In fact, he even spent a lot of time studying classical liberalism. American writers even, such as Adam Smith. Mao Zedong spent a lot of time in the library, actually, to advance his political understanding and educate himself. In fact, he went through a great deal of repression from his father due to his intellectual pursuits. And counter to popular thought, Mao actually wanted to become a teacher and enrolled into the fourth normal school of, forgive me for butchering the name, but Shengshu, which later merged to become the first normal school of Henan, which was widely seen as one of the most prestigious institutions in China. Mao, along with a bunch of young revolutionaries, formed the Renovation of the People's Study Society, and also was later employed as an assistant librarian at Peking's University. Mao even went as far to join the university's philosophy and journalism societies, attending many lectures to further his education. The CCP themselves was also a bunch of academics, so the Communist Party and the Red Guard were nowhere near anti-intellectuals, or even anti-academics for that matter. But the reference they were speaking of was Mao's Cultural Revolution. Except instead of it being something that's against the Big Bang, it was trying to weed out something very different. They were trying to weed out what they call revisionists. People who had capitalist sympathies. And if I'm straight up honest, it wasn't false. We can see to this day how communist China became more and more capitalist, right? Because when he saw revisionism all through the CCP, he wasn't lying. A lot of the reasons they may have chosen to go that way may have to do with like the famines they faced because of mistakes that Mao had made and had acknowledged and took a responsibility for. Nonetheless, killed millions of people. But those mistakes would have been made by America or any other nation. And in fact, a lot of the death tolls came from famine, not murder. Yes, you can point out that that's a failure of leadership. However, China is a region that had faced famines many, many times before. And that's also nothing that has easy solutions, despite what Americans might want to say. I mean, it's really easy for Americans to sit on a perch and speak all this stuff when most of our food and crops and money and resources come from us exploiting the third world in the first place. So we're taking from the globe to feed ourselves while others starve because of our greed. But I digress. People talked about how there was executions of professors and scholars and beatings and shamings, and that is not false. That happened, but it wasn't as an attack against them being intellectuals. However, it was an attack against their perceived sympathies for capitalism, their revisionism. Now, I wasn't there, and I don't know the history enough to speak about what was real and what wasn't, but there was definitely a whole bunch of infighting. They were trying to weed out the bourgeois elements within inside their society. However, much of it turned into lateral attacks against people who should be comrades, following much along the lines of what we would call cancel culture, but to the next level. What's really important to note is that it wasn't like there was one faction of people or that it was one revolutionary movement massacring or attacking people like it is portrayed by the capitalists. Instead, it was much more complex and complicated. There were the radical Red Guards, for example, versus the revisionist Red Guards. The revisionist Red Guards tended to be more along the lines of the CCP, moving towards what seemed to be more capitalist and bourgeois agendas, but still utilizing the same fervor from Mao's Cultural Revolution to get momentum. While the radical Red Guard, on the other hand, tended to be a lot more proletarian in nature. I have read and seen things that point out that a lot of the proletarians at that time were the former bourgeoisie's children. But that brings into question of, are we dedicated to principles or people? Well, that's a conversation for another video. But there is this concept that's pushed through American media that communist China was pushing brutality and violence just for the sake of brutality and violence. That it was totalitarian in nature, and so it was flexing that upon its people as a repressive force. But that's not exactly what happens. Like I mentioned before, revisionists were attacked, and then people turned on each other, accusing each other of being revisionist, being pro-capitalist, and I'm sure some of that was very true. I'm sure some of the people did have some things that they needed to be accountable for, and the people were holding them accountable. However, as we see often within our own collectives, in our own community, they started to devour themselves because when you have a power vacuum, which was created through Mao's Cultural Revolution, people trying to step in and take the place of the state, well, yes, in Mao's name, but yet and still, you get horde infighting. You get people competing to see who stands on a higher pedestal and who is lowly, whatever justification they can use to grab power. Not to mention that when the wheels start turning, there's a lot more motivation to come into play because you start to look at people who have taken loved ones or friends, comrades from you, even though they were formerly comrades. And if we think that we would do differently, I mean, I would argue that you should go and look at the political scenes in this society, whether it's Twitter, whether it's social media, or whether you're on the ground like myself and you're talking about in real life. They're always fractured and devastated by internal conflicts. It's an inconvenient reality, and that's what we saw. We saw people find justifications to get at people that they had grudges against, sometimes very validly, sometimes more dogmatically. There's a lot of things that happened during the Cultural Revolution that I do not think can be justified. There are many that I think can be. And there's a lot of good that came out of it, not just harm. We saw gains and prosperity through China, but again, we don't really care about that as Americans. We're just looking for the monster to demonize, right? I mentioned a little bit earlier that a lot of the things that they claimed where traits of communist China we see today in America and always have. We see the violence inherent in European societies that have demonized knowledge that they have not accepted. And it was projected upon China as part of the Red Scare propaganda, not just in this show, but historically. Capitalism over and over again, from climate change to flat earthing it up, have been going anti-science. Shit. You see tobacco companies back in the day trying to deny the doctors and the facts they have. You see people prospering off of anti-mask rhetoric and trying to sell you horse tranquilizer and shit. That's not, at least from my understanding, anything that's came out of the CCP or China or the Red Guard, though. And I find it really interesting that the US has a notorious history of projecting. And then we come introduced the benevolent white man.
So do y'all remember that woman I talked to you about who watched her dad be murdered in this TV show? Her name was Ye Wen-ji. And shortly after her father's murder, she got recruited to the CCP, where they saw her aptitude towards science and recruited her to do experiments up on a secret base, them devastating the land, taking all the crops to work on building industry, which to me seemed like a reference to the Mao's failed Great Leap Forward. There was mad abuses within that base, and it was absolutely toxic. She was tired with her lot in life and the way the CCP were handling things, but she was making the best out of a bad situation. Well, then she meets this white man, whose name was Mike Evans, a child of a rich oil baron who was out there in China to fight for environmental rights of a bird, utterly ignoring the plight of the people around him, as we often see white folks do, ignoring the human cost of life and focusing instead on the bird. This may come across as noble of caring, because who doesn't love animals? However, I think it speaks volumes to why he would disregard life and why many people of that persuasion do as well. Because overall, people of color do not weigh the same on his conscience as a bird. Now, do I think that a bird should go extinct for humans and the way we move through the world? No, absolutely fuck not. We have ran too many species out of existence. However, anybody, especially a Caucasian person, especially a Caucasian rich white man, comes in and values animal life over human life, it tells me something very specific about their character. Honestly, just another white man trying to dance with wolves.
Oh, not this shit again. Hank, your grandma is not a Cherokee princess. You're just a disease-ridden wasp. You can't even tell that it's not the same wolf. There's actually 3 of us. Just wait, this is where it gets good. Oh fuck, white people ruin everything.
He started to build a bond with her, a romantic interest, if you will. But for her, she has a major loss of hope, loss of belief, and faith in humanity. And just at that time, an alien signal comes in saying, "Do not respond. If you respond, we will come. If we come, we conquer. I am a pacifist." Which she responds, "Please come. We cannot save ourselves." Fast forward, yes, there's about to be some spoilers. Those two have become the ambassadors of humanity, speaking to the aliens that they call lords, and giving us all away to the aliens' will. Instead of supporting the alien invasion, or the US government, or even the CCP, what you can do right now is become a Patreon, which helps me bring you this content a little bit quicker, faster, and more often. Because it's hard out here, and I know I have to struggle to live. Also, if you're a big fan of hip-hop, you gotta check out my music. I am, of course, Big Villainous. But check out my content real quick.
All money is blood money. Cotton picking presidents hand bloody. All money is blood money. War for the gold, leaving children running. All money is blood money. Popping wicked murder, we find it funny. All money is blood. So we have talked about the propaganda that was put out against the Communist Party within this situation. some revisionism around the things that happened under the Cultural Revolution. However, the fact that they try to project American ignorance onto the Chinese is kind of ridiculous and serves to push the Mongolian horde concept, a very racialized concept that is pushed often against China and communism. I am an anarchist, so I will say, I don't really support the Chinese government either, despite their claims to be communist, which I severely question. However, I feel like those critiques must be accurate to what actually happened, and it's for another video. But one thing I felt like I needed to really speak on is something that really touches here at home. It's the banality of evil, a very American story. So the original book, named The Banality of Evil, was written by Hannah Arendt and was a depiction of how the Nazis justified their behavior as just doing their job. And how instead of this malicious demon of a person that you met Nazis that had good manners and were very respectable and then justified their actions under the concept of just following orders, taking little to no responsibility for the outcomes of one's actions. What we see in America is that is often the case when we speak about capitalism, is when we speak about the military-industrial complex and their collaborators. There's a point in the three-body problem where Augie Salazar is recruited by Thomas Wade, who is pretty much a weapons producer. And she was working on a project that was meant to help the people of the world. She was working on a nanofiber project. But because of the threat of the impending alien invasion, Thomas Wade recruited her into a project to stop the collaborators on Earth, who were living on a traveling ship and were in direct communications with the aliens. The ship was ran by good old Mike Evans. Fearing some ramifications from the communications from that ship to the aliens, Thomas Wade, along with a young soldier named Raj, Augie, and anybody under his payroll, were recruited into the project to stop that ship at any means necessary, but not in the Malcolm way. So what they chose to do was set a nanowire trap. Now this nanowire trap ended up shredding the ship and whoever was in it into multiple pieces, including killing Mike Evans. However, they had no regard for the human life that was on that ship, many of which were young children. Everybody on that ship was fatally murdered. Now Augie, with the type of conscience, realized the atrocities that she had done and could barely live with herself, downing alcohol left and right. Well, on the other hand, Raj justified his actions, just following orders, trying to save the world from global domination, not taking any real accountability for the actions he just did and what that says about not only them, but us as humanity, or at least the US government, corporations, and the American people. Now, we must come to acknowledge that tech plays a major role in the military-industrial complex. This scenario is far from unbelievable. The only thing that seems semi-unbelievable is the fact that Augie has a conscience, because tech has had a fundamental role in imperialism, colonialism, and warfare. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and the surveillance system, many of which are household names, like Microsoft, when they worked on a project called Windows for Warships, for example. Now, ironically and very humorously, because of someone adding an extra zero, Windows catastrophically failed, leaving a warship dead in the sea for hours, vulnerable to any of its enemies. Unfortunately, nobody took that opportunity. I don't know why. If I was a rebel fighting for their freedom and I seen this naval ship, oh yeah, it's getting seized. But I don't really advocate it. Just in theory. But that deal that happened in the 90s was only the beginning of Microsoft's working with the military. In fact, they strived to land many more contracts, including around the HoloLens. If you don't know what the HoloLens is, it's Microsoft's version of Google Lens and other forms of virtual gaming headsets. In 2019, Microsoft won a $22 billion contract with the military called IVAS, Integrated Visual Augmented Systems, replacing the former Land Warrior / Net Warrior. They're also very involved in cloud computing. Yes, building clouds that compute. No, I'm playing. Things like Jedi. Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Project, which was a $10 billion contract. In fact, Microsoft won that contract specifically because Donald Trump really does not like Bezos. But unfortunately for Microsoft, it was later canceled and was later replaced with the Joint Warfare Cloud Capability Project, JWCC for short, which was a $9 billion contract split between 4 different companies. Now, we're not surprised when we hear about Bill Gates, for example, working with the military. We already know their inclinations towards pro-state agendas and how they will serve the interest of the American institutions. But what if I was to tell you there is a game developer that created the Oculus and now has landed some of the biggest military contracts in tech? It's true. A very lucky man who is so lucky that it's his last name.
My name is Palmer Luckey, and I'm a virtual reality enthusiast and the designer of the Rift.
And when I left Oculus, it was more apparent than ever that the traditional defense contractors who were really good at building things like better fighter jets, bigger submarines, bigger aircraft carriers, were not well equipped to build the technology that was going to matter for the future of warfare. And it was also abundantly clear that the technologies that were equipped with the technology and the tools and the talent to make it different in this space were largely refusing to work with the defense sector. They were refusing to work on defense technology.
That is really the reason that I started thinking about what a next generation defense company would look like. What would it look like to build a company that could take those bright people out of the advertising industry, out of the search engine optimization industry, out of the augmented reality mustache emoji industry.
Went from a, child prodigy developing gaming tech to developing anduril. Anduril first originally got their start by working border surveillance, which is a very bipartisan issue. So yes, Donald Trump was very about trying to build their wall. And so when anduril started proposing drone and camera surveillance, they were all for it. But like I said, it's bipartisan. And Obama was the reporter in chief. So Joe Biden, his personal white man, of course, is 100% on board as well. One of their major tactics was that they have a CEO and a founder. The founder is very Republican. That's Palmer Luckey. And the CEO, however, is a Democrat. So they try to play both ends of the field, which really isn't that hard because they're really the same thing. Just 2 manifestations of the same face. In 2022, they landed a $1 billion contract to develop counter-drone systems. That don't seem too bad, right? That's just some tech to stop drones and stuff. Well, then like all good corporations, they moved on to try to expand. So they bought a company building the Andal, which is an explosive munitions drone. This explosive munitions drone can be used to take down tanks, and I'm pretty sure buildings. But hey, it's okay. Weapons of war aren't really that big of a deal. You gotta make a profit somehow, right? They envision being able to develop drone fleets as an innovation to aerial warfare, to step up the game when it comes to war. Because why do we need manned vehicles? We can just use drones for everything. In fact, we can use AI to then control them drones. So you don't even have to have a man making a decision.
When Andal looks at buying companies, we typically want to buy companies that are quite far along building something that is differentiated, that is far ahead of what we have, and that would be difficult for us to catch up with. And so what it really comes down to is, do they have something that will become much more valuable when paired with our core product, which is Lattice AI? Can autonomy make this thing that they're making into a much more powerful product? And that's been the basis of all of our acquisitions so far. This is Fury. It's an unmanned combat aircraft that is able to work in collaboration with manned fighters, with other manned aircraft, to hugely push out the range that we can engage targets at without putting people at risk. That's kind of one of the coolest things about autonomous systems, not necessarily the fact that they can think faster or do better than a person, but they can also just throw away their lives.
Holy moly, Batman, look who we found. The bastard that invented Skynet. We can just program the parameters, a little bit like Lavender. Have y'all heard of Lavender? I have no evidence that Anduril is in any way involved with Lavender, but Lavender is a project, an AI-powered project that the state of Israel is working on that identified people that were allegedly connected to Hamas. And those people were about 36,000 people were automatically put on a target list, which the bombing campaign that happened in Palestine has been using that list as if they are orders. That could be one thing that go wrong. But Luckey assures us that they were gonna obey by American laws. that the US has very thorough regulations about who they can sell to. I mean, it's not like Israel's a nation that we supply tons of weapons to or anything. Not to mention, Palmer Luckey was also talking about an unmanned AI-powered submarine that he assures us will not have nuclear capabilities. At least for now. But he's not the only warmonger out there. There's many tech companies that work directly for the military and have no ethical qualms with it, developing weapons of war. Palmer Luckey see this as an innovation to be taken advantage of.
Large primes are struggling to do things the way Anduril does because they're publicly traded companies with an existing investor class that invested in them to be a certain type of company. At the same time, I hope they do get there. I think that maybe they're not going to get quite to where Anduril is, but I think that we could get to a future where defense companies are spending more on developing their own products than the government is.
That a smart capitalist would always do this, and that it's just a good business strategy. And that there's some transparency because it's the government making the decisions of who he's able to sell weapons to. And because you can vote, you have some voice, supposedly. There's this endless argument I hear all the time called the greater good argument. We see this in the three-body problem, but we also see this in the legions of employees in Andal, in the people who are in Microsoft working to develop weapons of war for the military, to help assist in murdering and committing genocide. We see this in the massacre that happened in the three-body problem, the massacres that happened in Palestine, the massacres that happened in Pakistan, Nigeria, and the list of nations goes on and on and on. And if they aren't trying to find the justification that way, which we see very much in this film, we see Raj's response, something that has been known as the Nuremberg defense. The Nuremberg defense was one put out by Adolf Eichmann. No, not Adolf Hitler, Adolf Eichmann, who was an SS member. Adolf Eichmann said he isn't responsible because he was following orders, that it was on him to make those decisions and he had no choice in the matter, that he was just doing his job. That is the same stance that Raj took after he killed a bunch of children that were essentially harmless at this point. Now you can argue they didn't know they were harmless, but they obviously didn't do enough intel to even figure out that there was a bunch of children on board, much less the agenda of what was about to happen, or the fact that the aliens had already cut Mike Evans completely out the fold. He says that, of course he did that because he had to stop this great evil, and he was following orders, using both the greater good argument and the Nuremberg defense. But one thing I gotta say to Raj, and to Palmer Luckey, and to everybody who works for him, the idea that it's your job does not justify your actions, does not evade you from accountability. For all the warmongers from Bill Gates to Palmer to Bezos to any of them who seek to wage war, to sell and profit off warfare and genocide, there will be a day that you will be held accountable. These are some direct ways that science plays a big role in it. To expand upon how different types of science and technology can be a part of colonialism and warfare, you should go watch this video by Dr. Fatima, where she describes how astronomy plays a major role in colonialism, specifically focusing on Palestine and the disrespect of indigenous rights of the Hawaiian peoples. It's a long video, it's exhaustive, but it drops a lot of good knowledge. Also, I encourage you to learn more about the things I'm talking about. Learn about Anduril, learn about Microsoft, and learn about all these war criminals and weapon dealers. Follow up about the Nuremberg defense and see its correlations to the way America moves. Especially if you don't already understand why Hannah Arendt and myself used the words banality of evil. Because evil isn't the monster that you're looking for. All right, but let's talk about the Red Scare. Red Scare propaganda has been something we're very familiar with in America. We see it in almost all our films. We even see it in foreign films like James Bond, the scary communists coming in to invade the free country. Despite in reality, communism is gonna further freedom, not restrict it. Capitalism is the one that's notorious for actually restricting freedom, like Red Dawn, where a bunch of paramilitary troops from the Soviet Union invade America. Now, this was still in the peak of Red Scare propaganda, but how often, ask yourself this, do you see Russians or Chinese being depicted as the big scary commies coming to bring a totalitarian regime to take away all your freedoms, to make you into the Borg. Like, that's a pretty common trope in American media, right? Now, I will say Three Body Problem has an actual Chinese author and had some Chinese folks involved in its production. But I don't know what their political allegiance is, because there are Chinese folks, believe it or not, that are 100% down with capitalism and down with America. And for all y'all think it's a good thing, well, I hate to inform you, you're pretty brainwashed, because this is one of the biggest fascist nations in the face of the planet or human history. In fact, this is the nation who inspired Hitler. The way we did Native people is what he inspired to do the Jewish and Roma people. But that's another video. But coming back from that quick tangent, though there are people who are Chinese who were involved in the writing of this, involved in the production of this, it's very likely that because of being on Netflix, it has a very Western slant. And that Western slant is embedded with anti-communist rhetoric, including stuff that is just utterly false. That being said, I refuse to minimize some of the things that happened during the Cultural Revolution. There were atrocities that happened. However, there's a lot of progress that happened as well. One thing that we must acknowledge is that the founding of nations is built on blood. This is why I'm an anarchist and I don't believe in a nation state, but hey, all the authoritarians think I'm ridiculous. This is my good side. This is my bad side. This is my good side. This is my bad side. No idea why I did that, but you might be using it somewhere. But the way they have chose to revise it has played into both racist and anti-communist tropes, Red Scare tropes. The idea of the uneducated Mongolian horde. That is what they're pushing with the way they depicted the Cultural Revolution. Because the Cultural Revolution was not anti-science. It was anti-capitalist. It was anti-revisionist. And it was a bunch of witch hunting. Some of it valid, a lot of it just tragedies. But whether we like it or not, tragedies are always going to be associated with the development of nations, of nation states. However, to act like China was one that was anti-science is utterly ridiculous, because if we look at America, that's much more accurate describing the population of the people and the government. And it allows America to skip addressing real issues and real class conflicts that arise that caused the tragedy that happened during the Cultural Revolution. What we'll see is a firm understanding of the ways America and all nations, especially America, fail their people. We will see the weakness of nation states, which erode the power of not only China, but America. And also, most importantly, if they accurately depict it, we won't have such a negative opinion of communism or China. And that is fundamental, especially right now, in retaining American exceptionalism and its global hegemony. Red Scare is fully embedded in our culture, in our media, and even the way we think. So it's really important to address these things. Just as it's important to address the war criminals that are capitalist, that are seen as good guys, like Bill Gates or Palmer Luckey, or these fictional characters in this TV show. Now, this isn't hate on the show. I thoroughly enjoy watching it. There were just points in it that I wanted to point out, that I wanted to address so that we can thoroughly evaluate our culture and the media we consume. This by no means an exhaustive study on the Cultural Revolution or communism. There's better videos for that, like One Dime's video on the Cultural Revolution. I'm not down, I'm hoping you're not down, with profiting off the murder and genocide. Make sure that we hold these war criminals, these weapon dealers accountable. Make them go bankrupt, baby, let's go. That being said, we need to be aware of what's happening right here, right now, in this occupied Turtle Island. We are hitting hurricane season. So I gotta say, you should go over and monitor Fight Toxic Prisons, where we do phone zaps to try to make the prisons evacuate so people don't die. And you can be a part of making that change from your very house. A lot of people like to ask me what they can do. This is a great example of that. Keep an eye out for those phone zaps, and I'll give multiple shout outs over this hurricane season. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell so you can stay notified. Hit that comment section up so we can get up in the algorithm and this video can get some play. And a big thank you to my Patreons who make this possible, whose funding allowed me to keep doing this and being able to actually feed myself. I mean, a little bit. I need more Patreons, so become a Patreon. Where I can't promise that you're gonna get a whole bunch, but it'll help support this channel. And don't forget, if you are a $5 Patreon or above, you get to have your name at the end of every video. Stay strong, support your community, keep out there organized, And you know what time it is? It is the overthrow. To me, that's not like
That
a
shit-
revolution.
That
to
shit
turn
was
anything
so
positive.
raw. I was like, yo, the kids die? They don't have to. Like, this one doesn't have to. This nigga's perfectly healthy.
Stop the gap. I destroy every favorite sympathizer. Call me Darth Vader, cause I force choke that bitch Henry and Hulk slam him into the wood chipper. Pop his little brother's hand like overripe grape too.
Yo, chill the fuck out, you aggro ass nigga. That's wild as hell. We better than that fool. That's a goddamn kid.
You lying to yourself. I know you better than you know yourself. I've peered into your very soul. You tell yourself that you care, that you're empathetic. But the truth is, you come from the dirt, the grime, the filth